"So how much did your mother leave you?" Larry asked me bluntly right after my mother's funeral. I couldn't believe he said that without even a word of sympathy for me. He must have thought the inheritance was already in my account because he saw me with the bank book. But that was just wrong as a human being. "It's about $2 million, I said. $2 million. That's it," Larry replied, smirking in a way that made me feel uneasy. "Well, even after taxes, there should be hundreds of thousands left." I didn't like his reaction at all. He had a nasty smile that made me uncomfortable. I didn't know what he was planning, but I was sure things wouldn't go his way. The next day, Larry quickly started his plan, but his shallow thinking was going to cost him everything. He just didn't know it yet. "My name is Sarah Taylor. I got married through an arranged marriage when I was 19. My husband's name is Larry, and he works for a company. He is 3 years older than me and is the oldest son of the Owen family. However, even though he's called the oldest son, his younger brother Frank left the house after graduating from university and hasn't been in touch since. So Larry was treated like an only child and was very loved by my parents-in-law. Honestly, I didn't want to marry Larry, but my mother came from a family that had been running a business for generations. I was in a position where I couldn't go against what my parents decided, so I ended up marrying Larry. He couldn't refuse the marriage either because his father was in business. We didn't marry out of love. It was a marriage far from happiness. Unfortunately, we couldn't have children. Since we got married young, it was hard to accept that we couldn't have kids, and I hoped that having a child would improve our situation. But even with hospital visits, it didn't happen. "Hey, barren woman, are the chores done?" At first, my parents-in-law, who used to treat me well as a young lady, started calling me a barren woman after a few years. "I mean, you should be able to make it happen if you just do what you're supposed to do. It's a waste of money going to the hospital." My father-in-law would say mean things to me every day, but Larry never stood up for me. While I was being scolded by my in-laws, he would either read the newspaper or take a nap, snoring away. Even when I wanted a change and said I wanted to work, he would say, "If you go to work, people will think we're not doing well," and wouldn't let me leave the house. At that time, it was common for women to become homemakers after getting married. However, living with just my mother-in-law was honestly a nightmare every day. No one would help me. I couldn't worry my parents by telling them, and I couldn't run away because our marriage was tied to work. Still, I thought I would be rewarded someday and desperately endured every day. However, no matter how many years passed, the situation never got better. 19 years after our marriage, when I turned 43, my father-in-law died in an accident. That incident led to the discovery that his company had been avoiding taxes. The back taxes and fines depleted our assets. Our property was seized, and the company went bankrupt. Although we kept the house, we had to let go of our comfortable lifestyle. I thought it would be hard for Larry, who was then 45, to find a new job, but my parents introduced him to one. Thanks to that, he quickly found work. But my mother-in-law became like an empty shell and aged rapidly. For a while, she didn't even have the energy to say mean things to me, which was a relief. But then she had a stroke and needed care. With this, I truly lost any hope of having a child anymore. I was already 43 and somewhat giving up in my heart, but this became the real turning point for letting go. Larry, as if it were only natural, pushed the care of his mother onto me. On his days off, he would lounge around just like before. "Larry, I wish you'd help with your mother's care sometimes," I gathered my courage and told him one day. Even if it were just on his days off or even for one meal, if he could help, it would mean so much to me. But Larry frowned and said, I'm working, you know. Let me rest on my days off." Larry just didn't seem to understand. I don't really have what you would call a day off. After Larry's father's company went bankrupt, my parents started worrying about me. They finally said, "Come back home." But what would happen to his mother if I left now? "We have a caretaker come once a week, but I can't imagine having the money to hire someone every day for this house. Even though I was treated badly, I couldn't abandon her. It just wasn't in me to do that. Eventually, Larry started leaving the house early, even on his days off. He said he felt uncomfortable if he stayed home and relaxed. I heard through the neighbors that he started saying, "My wife won't even let me relax at home on my days off." He began taking solo trips, and the neighbors knew his mother needed care. Knowing this, yet acting as if he left all the caregiving to me, showed he didn't care about how others saw him. It was sad to see his mother, who loved Larry, being ignored by him once she got sick. Sometimes she would say, "It's because you're here that Larry won't come." But when I replied, "Should I leave then?" she would quickly go quiet. This went on for another 19 years, and the long caregiving period finally ended when my mother-in-law passed away, reuniting with her husband. I was about to turn 59. I had no love left for Larry, but I had come to terms with many things. Leaving didn't seem possible, and I would probably spend the rest of my days in this house. Larry was diligent only in his work, and this was noticed. Even after reaching retirement age, he was asked to keep working as senior staff. This allows me to live the way I do now. We were never a close couple, but I am thankful for this aspect. Our marriage wasn't good, but Larry never tried to kick me out. He probably thinks it's too late for that now. He still prefers being out of the house on his days off, so I've come to enjoy my alone time. I've even taken up pottery as a hobby. I've made friends at this age and am spending days that I can finally enjoy for the first time since getting married. But this seems to have annoyed Larry. "You're out playing while I'm working," he said, and one day, he even burned my bag. I used the bag for my pottery class, and Larry burned it in the yard. "What are you doing? Don't get lost in weird hobbies, just do the housework," he said. My pottery materials and my pouch were still inside the bag. Even pouring water on it was too late. It turned to ashes. I was really furious. I thought it was too late for change, but I still had a long life ahead. The word divorce crossed my mind, but just as I was considering it, another misfortune struck. My parents suddenly passed away. My father died suddenly from an illness, and a month after his funeral, my mother also fell ill and passed away. It all happened so fast, and I was overwhelmed with sorrow. My brother Jack had already taken over my father's company, and with so many people at both my father's and then my mother's funerals, I ended up bedridden for about a week afterward. It must have been mental exhaustion. My friends from the pottery class were kind enough to check on me, but Larry mocked me, saying, "How long are you going to sleep?" I was tired after Mom's funeral too, but I didn't sleep that much. It must be nice to sleep all you want without working. It might have been a valid point, but as words from a husband to a wife, it was really hurtful. The next day, I forced myself to get up and return to my daily routine, since I didn't have the luxury to enjoy my hobbies anymore. It was a bare minimum life, but Larry seemed satisfied and didn't care about my feelings. Then, sometime after my mother's funeral, I remembered that the payment deadline to the funeral home was approaching and looked at the bank book. Jack was busy with work, so I had promised to make the payment on his behalf. However, Larry saw me with the bank book and came over with a sleazy smile. "So, how much was your mother's inheritance?" I was shocked by his words. He said this right after my mother's funeral, without a single word of concern for me. He must have thought the inheritance had been deposited because he saw me looking at the bank book. But surely that's unthinkable for a human being. I answered dully, "About $2 million. $2 million? That's it?" he said, smirking with an unpleasant smile. "Well, even after taxes, there should be hundreds of thousands left." What an awful smile. I didn't know what Larry was thinking, but I was sure things wouldn't go his way. Without saying anything to him, I quietly put away the bank book. Finally, noticing the mood, Larry spoke up. "Well, you've had it tough. You should rest early today." It was unusual for Larry to offer kind words, maybe because he felt awkward. Far from making me happy, it made me feel sick. I didn't want to see his face anymore, so I went to bed early that day. However, something unexpected happened the next day. After breakfast, Larry left for work as usual, but then I got a call saying he hadn't shown up at his workplace. I was shocked because this had never happened before. Worried that he might have been in an accident, I hurriedly called Larry, but I couldn't get through. As I paced around restlessly, I walked into the living room and understood everything. On the living room table was a piece of paper. It was a divorce form already filled out by Larry. The moment I saw it, I thought, "No way," and checked where I had put the bank book the day before. As I expected, the bank book was gone. "Unbelievable," I muttered and sighed. It wasn't an accident or anything. Larry had likely disappeared on his own. I had thought he was up to something in the living room that morning. By taking those items, he must be planning to start a new life without me. Larry hadn't driven me out before because he was waiting for my parents' inheritance. The stolen bank book was proof enough. Even with this realization, I remained calm. There was no need to panic. I slowly filled out the divorce form and took it to the city office. Larry had sown the seeds of his own downfall. I decided he needed to fully understand that it was too late for regrets. I properly contacted Larry's workplace and said, "I can't reach him either, but it doesn't seem like an accident. I'll let you know as soon as I get in touch. Sorry for the inconvenience." The workplace said they would treat it as a paid leave for the day and wished him well, which made me envious of Larry for having such a good workplace. After all, it was a company introduced by my parents. I hoped he would be sincere towards his workplace, but now he was going to be a stranger to me. I managed to submit the divorce form successfully. After going through so much, it's surprising how easily I became free. I wondered if my life could have been different if I had divorced earlier. As I was packing up my things, my phone rang. It was Larry, who hadn't answered my calls before. I knew what he would say, so I ignored it and kept packing. The phone kept ringing again and again. Eventually, even the house phone started ringing. It was probably Larry, and it was so annoying that I reluctantly decided to answer it. "Hello," I said casually. Sure enough, I heard Larry's panicked voice on the other end. "Yes, I called because I was informed you hadn't shown up for work. You should contact your workplace immediately." "That's not the issue right now." Larry interrupted me, shouting, "I can't withdraw the money." Hearing his voice, I couldn't help but burst out laughing. "So he finally noticed, huh? I thought he must not have realized because he stole the bank book in a hurry." "My ID? You burned it, remember?" "What? No, don't you remember it was in the bag for my pottery class?" I answered, laughing. Larry sounded flustered. "Then this ID, isn't it expired?" "I wouldn't know. After your mother passed away, I repeatedly asked you to take care of the paperwork. I went to the bank for the procedure, but they said it couldn't be done because I wasn't the heir. So the bank book was left untouched with just a few dollars remaining. Don't mess around. You have to properly organize things for someone who's not here anymore, right? You said you'd take care of it eventually, so keep it in mind. Don't blame me." "Then what am I supposed to do with this bank book?" "What to do or not to do, unless I go to do the paperwork, there's nothing that can be done about it." As I spoke, Larry kept complaining, but I didn't feel like replying and fell silent. Impatiently, Larry seemed to have gone back to the bank teller, explaining the situation. "I accidentally burned the ID. Can't anything be done? Maybe by proxy? Look, I'm on the phone with my wife right now." It seemed he put it on speaker, and I could hear the troubled voice of the teller too. I questioned his words. "Larry, what are you talking about? You know you can't do anything like that as a stranger, right?" "Huh?" "The divorce papers were properly processed just now. Thanks for the preparation. Bye." I said what I wanted to say and hung up the phone. I'm sure the bank teller heard my last words too. By now, Larry must be either pale with shock or red with anger. Just imagining it made me laugh. I knew I had to leave the house before he returned. With that thought, I quickly packed my things and left the house. My destination was my family's old home, which was empty after my parents passed away. I had inherited that home as well. My mother's assets from running her company totaled $15 million. However, inheriting a large sum of cash wouldn't be safe if Larry found out, especially since we had no children. So I inherited just enough to live comfortably, about $2 million. The rest was the family home, my mother's beautifully preserved dresses, and my father's antiques. If these heirlooms were appraised, they would be worth a lot. I had my brother Jack's permission for this arrangement. Jack had moved out after getting married and was worried about the family home becoming vacant. He had children and had taken over the company, so he was happy to inherit just the cash. We completed the inheritance discussions peacefully. After arriving at the family home, I informed Jack that I had divorced Larry and would be living there. He said, "If you are going to live in the family home, it won't be empty, which is a relief. But are you really okay with divorcing Larry, Sarah?" "Yes," I replied. "We don't have children, and both our parents have passed away. If we both want a divorce, then it's for the best. I want to restart my life, and I have no regrets." Jack was worried about me being alone, but living as Larry's servant for life would have been worse. Besides, if I could spend the last moments of my life in this house, where I had many memories with my family, even if I was alone, it would be happiness. Larry kept calling me many times after that, but he didn't think I would be at the family home and never came to visit. That day, I spent alone in peace. The house was lonely without a family, but I felt relieved from the bottom of my heart. The next day, I finally gathered the energy to go make a deposit. The bank book was with Larry, and it was a bit troublesome to retrieve it. I decided to go around 5:00 a.m., assuming Larry would be asleep. When I got home and opened the front door, the smell of alcohol hit me. Wow, I couldn't help but grimace at the smell. Entering the living room, I saw beer cans scattered all over. My bank book was torn and left on the table. This is terrible. Tearing up someone's bank book like this, no matter how angry you are, is just wrong. I gathered up the pieces and put them in my bag. I also took a few clothes and went back to my family home. Then I headed to the bank. As I approached the entrance, I heard someone call out, "Sarah." It was Larry. He had been waiting for me. I noticed the bank book was gone, so I figured you'd come here. "Whether I come here or not is none of your business," I said. "Don't say that. We've been together for so long." Even though the divorce was finalized, he still talked like this. I ignored him and entered the bank. Larry kept trying to talk to me, but I firmly ignored him. That's when it happened. "Brother, isn't that Sarah?" Someone called out. "Frank, why are you here?" It was Larry's brother, Frank. Both Larry and I were surprised to see him. We hardly ever saw Frank, usually only at funerals. It had been about 43 years since I married Larry, and this was probably the third time I met Frank. He had wanted to cut ties with the family, but his parents, worried about their company's reputation, begged him to at least show up for important family events. Since we had met at my mother-in-law's funeral a few years ago, he probably recognized us. "Ah, I'm here for the inheritance of Mom's estate. Thought I'd check the balance and then inform you too," Frank said. Larry's eyes lit up. I was surprised too. I thought there was just a few dollars left in the bank account, but according to Frank, there were also investment trusts set up a long time ago and safety deposit boxes rented during their father's lifetime. Frank had heard about it from his mother before she passed away. She had sent him a message saying, "If anything happens, you take care of it." However, due to his busy life, it had taken him this long to act. Frank looked apologetically at me and Larry. There was a letter in the safety deposit box along with some jewelry. Mom said all her estate should go to Sarah. "What?" I was surprised by Frank's words, but Larry looked even more shocked. Frank pulled out a letter from the documents he had with him. I recognized the stationery because I had bought it for my mother-in-law. The letter clearly stated that all the jewelry in the safety deposit box and other assets should go to me, her daughter-in-law Sarah. I could picture my mother-in-law writing it carefully. I remembered asking her if she needed the letter, but she had coldly replied, "It has nothing to do with you." Maybe she meant to write this letter at that time. I covered my mouth in surprise. "Sarah, you've been taking care of everything on your own, right?" Frank said. Despite the mean things my mother-in-law had said, she was sorry and wanted me to handle the estate. She knew that if she told Larry, he'd probably try to keep it quiet. Next to me, Larry's face turned red, and he started trembling. "Well, I never intended to inherit anything, but as the legal heir, I thought I had to handle it. It's just a matter of changing the name to Sarah, so that shouldn't be a problem for you, right, Larry?" Frank said this casually, not knowing about our divorce. Later, I was called to the bank counter. Larry, without any purpose, just sat in the lobby, lacking the energy to follow. That day, I completed the reissuance of the bank book and the transfer for the funeral home. "I'll be going ahead, Sarah. I'll contact you again," Frank said, leaving Larry and me behind in the bank. I safely returned home. Frank contacted me again later, explaining that Larry had protested, saying, "Such a letter is invalid." But Frank convinced him, saying, "Respect Mom's wishes." However, unable to satisfy Larry, Frank visited a lawyer for free advice. Although the letter couldn't be recognized as an official will, the lawyer suggested that settling by discussion would be more cost-effective than hiring a lawyer. Larry agreed to the inheritance of the house. The investment trusts weren't worth much, and Larry reluctantly gave up on those and the jewelry. Thus, I formally received my mother-in-law's estate. If Sarah gets Mom's estate, I should get it from my mother-in-law, right? Larry argued with the lawyer, but that was a different matter. It was embarrassing. Even the lawyer scolded him. Larry couldn't accept it and finally tracked me down at the family home, showing up at my doorstep. I was wrong. "Let's start over," he begged, realizing he couldn't get anything. He knelt at the doorstep, pleading for reconciliation. Start over? There was never any love between us to begin with. What's there to start over? For the first time, I felt free to speak my mind. I shared my long-held feelings with Larry. He fell silent, seemingly regretting his actions for the first time, and I couldn't help but smile. "At least you still have the house, right? Have you contacted your workplace? If you're so desperate for money, you better work hard and not lose your job." After saying that, I closed the door. It was finally over. The bank book held assets left by our mothers, and with this, I could surely live comfortably from now on. Larry, however, continued to be absent from work without informing his workplace, which led to his dismissal. I had warned him. Without even his passion for work, what was left for him? Maybe his hard work wasn't out of responsibility, but to maintain his dignity. Now, without anyone to show his dignity to and missing the easy money he thought he'd get, it wouldn't be surprising if he felt he had lost his purpose in life. Even though I was concerned for someone I had spent years with, that was it. I had no intention of helping him. "I truly apologize for the trouble caused to you, Sarah. It's really regrettable," Frank said. He was the only one who apologized and told me I no longer needed to deal with Larry. Realizing the family's issues early on, Frank had left home young and was probably living happily now without involving himself in that home. Larry had become a recluse, but at his age, he could probably live on his pension. Wanting to start over showed he had some courage at least, but he should try starting over on his own. I began attending pottery classes again, and my friends were delighted with my return. I hadn't realized how enjoyable it could be to spend time just for myself. At the pottery class, I even met someone wonderful. Though I had sworn off marriage, being with someone who loves me might also be a form of happiness. Rather than being alone forever, it might be better to embrace new beginnings. It might feel too late, but just like with the divorce, it's never too late as long as you're alive. Anyone can find happiness, no matter their age. I believe that.